Hey everyone, my name is Lauren. For my trauma explanation video, I will be talking about domestic violence. So domestic violence can be in the form of emotional, verbal, physical, sexual, and financial abuse that occurs in relationships, whether the perpetrator be a family member, a friend, spouse, or intimate partner. The frequency and type of abuse that occurs in domestically violent relationships varies, yet there's a constant dynamic that portrays such abuse in which the perpetrator consistently attempts to control and have power over the victim. Emotional and verbal abuse are often harder to identify than physical and sexual abuse, as people can more easily justify the behavior or think that the type of communication and language is okay. That typically happens for people who were raised by parents or growing up relationships with siblings, guardians, family members that were emotionally and verbally abusive. So they don't know anything different. So they don't realize that it's unhealthy and abusive. The following are some examples of emotional abuse. So telling the victim that they can't do anything right, showing extreme jealousy when the victim spends time with anyone other than the abuser. The abuser communicates in a way that is hurtful, threatening, insulting, or demeaning, like talking down to somebody, belittling them. The abuser disrespects the feelings, thoughts, decisions, opinions, and or physical safety of the other person. A lot of people have heard of the term gaslighting now. Gaslighting is definitely a form of emotional abuse. Basically, what that is the abuser will turn the victim's feelings, or when they try to express how they're feeling, against them and almost make them feel guilty for even trying to express how they feel or for calling the abuser out on their own behavior. And usually the victim is the one that ends up like feeling bad or apologizing. When someone is experiencing domestic violence, they often live in a constant state of fear of their abuser, often described as feeling like they're walking on eggshells. They're afraid to upset their abuser. They don't want any type of retaliation or any argument because they're scared. My mock client that I will be giving the psychoeducation to today is based off of kind of a combination of some of my current clients. I'm a substance abuse counselor at the Women's Prison in Delaware. So a lot of the women that I work with have a history of domestic violence or currently in domestic violence relationships. Unfortunately, we even have people that are in relationships on the unit, even though they're not supposed to be, and will often participate in or be victims of domestic violence. So the client I'll be talking to is a 35-year-old woman who had just recently opened up in group. Again, she's incarcerated about being physically and sexually abused as a child after her mom passed away when she was 5 years old. She's discussed in individual sessions having codependent relationships in which she's a provider and is being relied on by others, both with intimate partners and family and friends. She's experienced physical and emotional abuse in several relationships, with partners, with family and friends, and they will repeatedly hit her, make her feel unworthy of any type of love, talk down to her. It seems that the client has not quite put this together and how her history and childhood are likely related to the type of relationships that she's repeatedly finding herself in as an adult, which is why during this individual session, I'll be providing psychoeducation on exactly that. She experiences significant amounts of guilt and shame, as well as really low self-esteem for being in these relationships, and often gets mad at herself for making what she calls stupid choices. All right, so we will go ahead and get started with the monologue. Good morning, Ms. Doe. I wanted to talk with you after you shared about your childhood and the things that you experienced from your family growing up in group last week. I wanted to let you know that I really appreciated you sharing your inner child poem. I think your story had a really significant impact for your peers who can relate. And I know from what you've shared with me that it was actually really therapeutic for you to just kind of say it out loud for the first time. So again, I wanted to thank you for having the courage in doing that. We've been working on healthy relationships and codependent tendencies in your treatment plan in our previous sessions, as well as healthy communication and increasing your use of assertive language when interacting with others. You've made significant progress already. I know that you carry a lot of guilt for finding yourself in similar patterns of relationships and not being able to provide for your loved ones while you're in here, figure out why you find yourself in these patterns. I thought I would share some information with you that might give you some insight into why you've experienced some of the things that you have in your adulthood, and why you feel the way that you feel, if you're open to that. You've shared a lot of really difficult experiences that you've endured as a child, all of which would be considered what's called an adverse childhood event. So the higher the amount of adverse childhood experiences, the more likely it is for someone to develop mental health diagnosis, develop a substance use disorder such as drinking to cope, the more likely someone is to be incarcerated, and the higher risk they have for having abusive relationships and experiencing what's called domestic violence as an adult. I know you've shared with me that you might feel guilty and shameful, and that you often blame yourself for the type of relationships that you find yourself in, for your drinking, for experiencing symptoms of depression and feeling unmotivated, for being here when your friends and family say that they need you at home. But a big part of why you find yourself in these situations is because of the experiences that you had as a child that you had no control over. It's common to have a lower self-esteem, like you shared, after being raised by people who society says are supposed to love you unconditionally and support you, but who actually make you feel like it's the opposite. It makes sense that it's difficult to trust other people, and because you have such a big heart, you don't want anyone else to feel the pain that you felt. So you take on the role of the caregiver in your relationships. You're always doing things for other people, always trying to take care of them, make sure that they're okay. Hence, finding yourself in codependent relationships. It makes it harder to trust people because those who were closest to you, that society says should protect us no matter what, are the same ones that left us or hurt us. Half the time we don't know that it's unhealthy behavior, the way someone might treat us, whether they put their hands on us, the way that they talk to us, anything like that, if that's all we know. So we end up in these relationships and friendships that have the same type of dynamic, where others might treat us the same way and we might take on that same role of caretaker. A lot of the codependency stuff that we've been working on comes from how we view relationships after experiencing domestic violence as kids and young adults. It can eat away at our self-esteem after being with someone who constantly makes us feel like we're not good enough and we're always walking on eggshells, even though we're always trying our hardest to not only please our friends and family, but to, be a good friend, be a good sister, be a good partner. People who abuse other people like this, who treat other people this way, it has nothing to do with the person they're treating like that and everything to do with them. And it can be one thing to know that and to hear that from somebody else, and another thing to actually feel that when it's happening to you. So just something to kind of think about. We also talk about the body's response to stress a lot in our groups, if you remember. If we're living in fear that someone is constantly going to get mad at us or hurt us or come back if we try to leave them, our body's releasing more and more of the stress hormones like cortisol, which is not good for our mental health, makes our anxiety even higher, can make us feel even more depressed, can make us gain weight, which makes us not feel good about the way that we look. We might have health issues, a weakened immune system. We might get sick more often. I don't know if any of this sounds familiar for you, things that you've experienced. We talk in group about the type of situations that we often find ourselves in and the type of lifestyle that we have to live in order to keep our addiction alive. A lot of these situations can be really dangerous. And I know a lot of that is something that you've shared with me in individual sessions with your peers in group. It's reasons like this too that also make it more likely for us to experience additional trauma or abuse in our adulthood. One of the things that you shared about in group, about remembering the physical and emotional abuse from your dad after mom passed away when you were really young, when your uncle took advantage of you sexually, we often push those memories so far down because it's just too painful. And I know that you're not the only one who has gone through this. And I don't know if you noticed after you shared that in group, how many of your peers were actually nodding and then commented, that they can relate, that they not only had experienced the same type of pain growing up, but have also tried not to remember it. That's why, while we might not consciously remember it all the time and think about it, our body does still remember the trauma and the things that we experience. So we might experience something like a trigger if we don't know that's what it is or what to call it at the time. Like an example of that would be what you shared the other day when one of the correctional officers yelled for everybody to lock in. There was a code and you started shaking. You said you immediately shut down. You felt like the walls were caving in. You had difficulty breathing. Might have been like an anxiety or panic attack. And at the time, it may not have seemed like it really made sense because unfortunately the COs yell very often, but sometimes if we experience domestic violence and we've been in relationships where somebody is speaking to us that way, it can easily trigger us if somebody else talks in the same type of tone. It may also come up when we're trying to be intimate with a new partner. We get really, really anxious or very emotional because our body's remembering what happened years ago with someone that we didn't want to touch us. And again, we don't usually put it together in the moment. Sometimes it's after the fact. Sometimes we never do. And we're just left really confused and actually continuing to beat ourselves up. Why did I feel like this? I really like this person. I wanted this to happen. This was consensual. What was going on for me? A lot of this can be results of the type of relationships that we've experienced in the past. I say all of this to say that what has happened to you throughout your life, none of that is your fault. It's why it's so important to share these experiences with your peers in group, because you're no longer holding on to the secrets and letting them build. A lot of our group members can relate because they've experienced the same things. Domestic violence is a lot more common than people really realize. And you have the power to regain control of your life. We'll keep working on your self-esteem pack and forgiveness work, and we'll go from there. But you got this. Me and the rest of the team and the community here support you in your process.